Resilience is built, and there's a great phrase in Japanese. It's actually a proverb. Directly translated, it goes like this: as the rain falls, the roots grow stronger. So the more you've been stuck in the rain, the stronger you get. That's absolutely true for leaders. So that's why resilience is a critical element for all leaders. And one more I'm going to add, because I was in India through COVID, and certainly we continue to battle it in India, around the world, and here in Japan with my team, but is optimism. I think the effective leaders that I've met over the years are optimistic. They don't pour sugar on the story. I mean, when it's raining, it's okay to say, hey, it's raining. But what they do is they reassure the team that, you know what, it's raining, and the rain will probably continue for some time, but eventually the rain will stop. Game-changing leadership is not about simply measuring the output. Anybody can do that. It's about how do you enable people to be the best version of themselves. Peter Drucker has a great quote, by the way. Many people listening might not know that India has two national ice hockey teams, a men's and a women's team, believe it or not. And, you know, I didn't know that there was ice hockey in India, but I discovered it thanks to a friend from the Canadian Embassy in Mumbai. And so anyway, I was able to get up there and volunteer and coach.
Hey, my wonderful listeners, welcome back. Words and adjectives are sure to introduce my guest for today. A transformative leader, a passionate champion of sustainability, acclaimed author, Guinness World Record holder, and a wonderful human being. It's an absolute joy and pleasure to welcome Paul Dupuis on this special Inspire Someone Today episode. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Srikanth, and thank you for that very warm introduction.
Well, your journey has started with multiple roles. So to just read out a few, Paul, newspaper delivery boy,
yeah,
baker, welder, taxi driver, TV extra, bodyguard, high school teacher, entrepreneur, and now CEO at Randstad Japan. And you had the distinction of taking Randstad India, where you played the previous role as CEO of Randstad India, to be one of the great places to work at. And it reminds me of this wonderful quote from Steve Jobs, which basically says, you can always join the dots looking backwards. So on that note and on that line, the newspaper delivery boy who went on to become the CEO, looking back, how do you reflect on all of this trajectory, Paul?
Well, thank you, Srikanth, for listing up all those roles that I played. There's still a bunch that aren't on that list, and I can share some of those. And also the notion of connecting the dots. One could look at that story and say, this guy has no idea where he's going. He's zigzagging around without any direction. But I like to think that there's a purpose in this journey, that everything we do in the past makes us stronger today, like tools in the toolbox. But if I go way back to first my upbringing in Canada, I'm from Windsor, Ontario, right on the border across from Detroit. And I grew up in Windsor, born and raised there, went to the University of Windsor. You know, and I was always kind of very fortunate to be involved in activities in the community, whether it was around sports, volunteering, and so on. And that was largely due to my dad. I think he was my first sort of role model as a leader. He was a high school teacher, happened to teach at the same high school I went to, of course. And, you know, I learned a lot from not only from his words, but from his actions. And that's one of the discoveries I made along my journey about leadership. It's more about actions. It's less about words. But, you know, that first job that you just mentioned as a newspaper delivery boy, I started when I was 12 years old. You know, I really learned a bunch of lessons, which I still use today as the CEO of a large organization. And the simple way to put that is that I learned the importance of one, making a promise and keeping it. We've all had that experience where, you know, you go downstairs in the morning and you go to look for your morning newspaper and it's not there. It happens once in a while for whatever reason. You know, it's a small disappointment, but it's a disappointment. And I realized that, wow, a lot of people are depending on me for that morning newspaper 365 days a year. And in Canada, that means snow in the winter, you know, and all the other seasons that come. So that was something really important that I learned along the way. And all those other jobs you mentioned, well, partly necessity to pay my way through university, But I'd say the one other role where I really learned some valuable lessons you mentioned was as a welder at Chrysler. Working on the assembly line, working as a welder for 5 years through university taught me the meaning of hard work. And also I learned about this thing called blue collar and white collar and the relationship between them, the syndrome. And then, of course, things like Kaizen, quality control, how a factory operates, all that stuff, which again has come in handy now in my current role. Because I work with a lot of customers who are in the same space. So again, I would just repeat, Shrikant, every role we have in our life, whether it's personal and professional zone, I think really helps kind of create who we are today.
No, that is very nicely put, Paul. And there was a reason why I listed out all of the roles that you played. Because in that, like you rightly mentioned, it's both blue collar as well as white collar jobs. But more importantly, was there any career trajectory points playing any of those roles that has catapulted you to do what you're doing today?
Well, I can tell you this much, especially in the industry I'm in, when you talk about HR solutions, HR, staffing and recruiting. I don't think I've ever met anyone who decided when they were a kid, a little boy or a little girl, that one day I want to be this and it's going to look like this, X, Y, Z, and then it actually comes true. Most of us, I'd say not all of us, probably you too, Shrikant, we all hit forks in the road, unpredictable things that happen, and we face choices, life choices, personal, professional, and so on. And we make the choice and it leads us down another path. And the choice we make is based on our previous experiences. It's based on wisdom gained through failures and successes. And then we make the choice. And the choice you make is always the right choice, by the way, because it's based on your previous experience and your instinct and so on. So, while I was a newspaper delivery boy, or while I was putting those welds on the vans on the assembly line, or while I was baking the apple pies as a baker or driving the taxi, whatever, I never imagined I would be CEO previously of Randstad in India, now CEO here in Japan. Certainly never imagined that. But I did know one thing. I knew one thing throughout that whole journey. I knew that there was a big world out there and I wanted to explore it. That was one thing for sure. I also knew that I really liked to be out of my comfort zone. I picked that up pretty early. I also discovered about myself that I like to be with people. I get energy from other people. So you could say that all these things I was figuring out as I was a young, a kid and then a young adult actually kind of came true. But I certainly didn't predict that I would be where I'd be now. I've always been a passionate student of leadership. So to become a leader kind of made sense as well.
It's very interesting, isn't it? The seeds of that journey get sown at every stage of your career. And like I said, when you look at the dots backwards, you say all of it makes a whole lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, every single experience we have in our life, we take away some skill or some discovery or some learnings. That I would call the tool in the box. So think about that toolbox. When you're a small child, you have pretty well nothing in your toolbox. It's an empty box. And then with each experience, we gather a tool, we pick up a tool. And by the time we get to, the latter part of our journey, or at least into the second half where I'm at now, I'm 53 years old. So I'm about halfway through life, I guess, depending on how if you're into biohacking, still got a long way to go. But there's a lot of tools in the box. Now, here's the challenge for all of us, not just me, of course, for everybody, is using those tools, actually using them effectively rather than just leaving them in the box. Remembering that we have those tools from things we've done in the past. It's very important.
So very true. We'll come to the point of leveraging the tools very soon. You're somebody who had played roles at highest level at multiple geographies, India, Japan, Europe, and you started off your career in the North Americas. So having traversed these various paths, Paul, what is it like leading in different cultures? What is same? What's different?
That's a powerful question. And I'm being asked that question a lot. It's interesting. The more I lead across borders and travel across borders, people are very keen to know about the differences. And I'm glad that you also asked about the similarities, because what I discovered, especially after leading in India, which is perhaps, let's take India and Japan. I've been in Japan, in and out of Japan now for 25 years. And then let's take India. If you were to take the whole world and put the world on a continuum, I think Japan is at one end and India is at the other. They really are at extreme ends of the continuum in many ways, from lifestyle to business culture to demographics. And certainly there is an element of how you lead will be different in each culture. So let's talk about some of the similarities first, because I think the similarities are ultimately what's most important. If you follow the 80-20 rule, that 80% of effective leadership is timeless and borderless. It doesn't matter where you are. It works around the world and across time and eras and genres. And you take that 20% is local and needs to be customized for the local. Then we can think about it like this. The stuff that works everywhere. And I've studied leaders over history from the beginning of time, again, across genre. I talk about it in the book that I wrote. But the idea is that timeless and borderless leadership is about some really basic principles. Let me give you some examples. So for example, Shrikant, would you follow a leader who always walked the talk?
Absolutely.
You would, right? Okay. If I ask that question in Mexico, China, Portugal, Canada, you're going to get yes everywhere. Okay. So would you follow a leader who always has your back in good times and bad, no matter how things go? Anyway, your leader always has your back. Would you follow that leader?
Absolutely.
I ask that same question all over the world. And by the way, I've done it. Talked to people across borders and I've asked these questions. I never found anyone who says no. I could go on. There's 10 more questions that talk about the similarities of leadership. So I try to be that leader. And I think we all should aim to be that leader where the universal answer is yes. Now, the differences. So Japan is a land of meticulous focus on process, efficiency, and quality. It's about incremental improvement. It's Kaizen. Kaizen is really about being lean and being efficient and constantly at one degree of improvement and compounded. Now, that requires a high level of focus and I would say persistence and some patience. Let's go over to India. So I arrived in India after being in Japan for many years, and I lived and worked around different other countries in Asia. And I discovered this land which was absolutely moving at turbo speed, young, growing fast, moving fast. The lights were on and sometimes they were off. It was a land of unpredictability. And also there was this incredible thing which I discovered called Jugad. Mm-hmm. And for me, now I know Jugad is debated, hotly debated, but my definition of Jugad is that Jugad is about ingenuity. It's about creativity. It's about finding a way to achieve the task, the mission, the goal, leveraging the stuff you have in front of you. So if you're to take that version of Jugad, as I described it, and combine it with Kaizen, what an amazing combination. Can you imagine the potential of taking Kaizen and Jugad and mixing those together? Those were two big differences. Now, when you're leading in Japan, it's about consensus, it's about focus, it's about discussing the plan, park it, do some analysis, come back, meet again, discuss again. Probably takes 3 to 4 times to then accomplish the final sort of plan. Okay, let's go. And then the action begins to execution. In India, that plan can kind of be crafted in a morning with a lot of debate, vigorous debate. And then the plan is decided and people are running out the door. So the speed from conceiving to planning to action execution in Japan and India is very different. That's not to say one is better than the other. Because I can tell you in Japan, when you decide finally that you're going to do something as a team, the execution is flawless from 1 to 10. But it takes a while to get started because of that process that needs to happen. In India, the time from conceiving to planning to action is really fast. But getting to 10 is the challenge. So again, I'll come back to what I said earlier about leading. In Japan, it's about maintaining the process and knowing that once the wheels are moving, it's going to get to 10. In India, it's about constantly checking on the North Star, doing pulse checks, making sure that teams are on task and focusing and so on and heading in the right direction. So both have their, opportunities and challenges. But I really I learned a lot of lessons about how the similarities of leadership are actually more important than the differences.
And somewhere I read probably in your book is the strength that chaos also brings in. And that's your first-hand experience of working in India, that there is strength in chaos as well.
Absolutely. Well, let me use another term, organized chaos. When someone first arrives in India, especially from outside India like I was, and had Never been to India, by the way. I'd never been there before. And I was tasked with leading a massive organization, complex, one that was struggling big time. The initial impression for those who arrive in India is it looks like chaos, from the business environment to the streets. But after living there for a while, not too long, after a few months, I started to see through the fog and realize that actually it wasn't chaos at all. In a way, it was organized chaos. I mean, it really was. Things worked. I got from point A to point B, and usually on time, because I got good at kind of anticipating the extra time it might take to get somewhere. The lights weren't always on, but they were on at the right time. And when they did go off, for example, we were about to go on live on my very first town hall in India with, almost 2,000 employees, and the power went out in the office. But our guys had anticipated that, and they had a generator ready to go to make sure if there was nothing else functioning, town hall technology would function. So things work in India, and I think that's the first realization we need to make. And maybe a bit of that is Jugad. But certainly there's the agility that I haven't really seen anywhere else in India.
Great. So now we'll get into the meat of our conversation. You've been at the helm for over 2 decades now. Some of the leadership lessons, tips and tricks that all of our listeners can learn from you. As a leader, what paradigms should a leader possess?
So first of all, we know that there are critical characteristics. To be an effective leader, there are some critical characteristics. We talk about things, and this goes back to the beginning of time when we were doing assessments and appraisals of leaders. We talk about leadership competencies. Certainly, the original companies were based on strategic thinking, the ability to build followership, the ability to create a vision and express it to the team, the ability to execute for results. Succession planning came into the picture. And then we started to hear about things, of course, in the early days about IQ, intelligence quotient was actually a leadership competency. Wasn't that interesting? You had to be smart to be a leader, which we've since discovered the smartest people don't necessarily make the best leaders. That's been flipped upside down. Then after that, all of those, let's say, traditional leadership competencies came the EQ, emotional quotient. We started to talk about how the leader needed to be in touch with people and understand people. So we saw the meter start to swing a bit. Right. And I believe this is still true, along with those other competencies. We heard a lot more about values of the leader. And then this phrase, walk the talk, came into the picture. More recently, and I think especially with COVID, if we talk about really the true critical characteristics of the effective leader, is the next Q. It's the CQ, compassion quotient. Because engagement and empathy is one thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean action. Compassion is empathy converted to action. And we've all kind of faced that, I think, in the past year and a half with COVID, where it's one thing to feel how the other person's feeling. It's another thing to get up and do something about it, especially when someone's struggling and suffering. Then we add in things like resilience. I absolutely believe that resilience is an imperative for every leader to possess. If you think about my definition of resilience is one that I learned as an ice hockey player growing up in Canada. It's about bouncing back when things don't go well. In the sports world, that means when you lose a game, coming back even stronger the next time. And resilience is only built from having that taste of the loss, of losing the game, or of maybe not performing, or of having something happen that you couldn't predict. Resilience is built, and there's a great phrase in Japanese. It's actually a proverb. Directly translated, it goes like this: as the rain falls, the roots grow stronger. So the more you've been stuck in the rain, the stronger you get. That's absolutely true for leaders. So that's why resilience is a critical element for all leaders. And one more I'm going to add, because I was in India through COVID, and certainly we continue to battle it in India, around the world, and here in Japan with my team, but is optimism. I think the effective leaders that I've met over the years are optimistic. They don't pour sugar on the story. I mean, when it's raining, it's okay to say, hey, it's raining. But what they do is they reassure the team that, you know what, it's raining, and the rain will probably continue for some time, but eventually the rain will stop. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. That sense of optimism, especially under pressure, is a critical characteristic of the effective leader.
I think that's a great combination, that sense of optimism and the resilience, right? You might be knocked down the previous day, but still come back the next day optimistic, saying that you can do better.
Always. I mean, it's not about They say that about boxing too. It's not the punches you can give. It's how can you take the punch and come back and get back up, right? So, oh, absolutely. And again, I think I learned that in sports, but you learn that as a leader in business. There's so much unpredictability. Certainly when you're leading a team, you're talking about people, because people are unpredictable. There's emotions and all kinds of things that happen in their personal and professional lives that, you can't control. And as a leader, I have a bunch of mantras, Shrikant, but one that I would share with you that keeps me focused and keeps me, I'd say, on task and resilient is take everything seriously, take nothing personally.
That's a great line. Take everything seriously, nothing personally. And we did touch upon the current state, pandemic, post-pandemic, whatever you would want to call it as. And around this time period, you also launched Top of Charts book, your E5 movement. Tell us the significance of E5 in the current context. How does that kind of apply in the current world that we are all in?
Sure. Well, thank you. It was what an experience writing the book. I certainly never imagined I'd be an author. And by the way, go back to that kid pedaling around the streets of Canada at 6 a.m. delivering the morning newspaper in the freezing cold. Never imagined I'd write a book and that it would become a bestseller. So I was a bit of serendipity, I guess, but I was studying on a course on leadership in London Business School, an executive training course. It was about transformative leadership, which is a bit coincidental. And I was asked to talk about my thoughts on leadership. And I did. And, I had kind of like any leader, we all form our thoughts over time and our beliefs on leadership through experience. And I had some pretty well-crafted ideas about what effective leadership was about. And I was explaining it. And then the professor stopped and said, "Paul, you need to write a book." Wow. Well, first of all, what a compliment. And I never imagined that, I would write a book. So I kind of put it aside. And then someone I really admire, an author here in Japan, Ken Honda, who's a best-selling author, said, "Paul, you need to write a book." Wow. Okay. And then I read the quote from Richard Branson where he said, "If you've had an interesting life, it's your duty to write a book and share your story with the world." I thought, well, come on, we've all had an interesting life in our own way. I mean, everyone has had an interesting life. So that was it. So I wrote the book. And the book is really a collection of stories from my journey. It's a narrative. It's a conversation with the reader. And it's built around these 5 E's. So the first E is envision. And you asked me, Shrikant, how does it connect with where we are now and where we're going in the future? Well, since the beginning of time, the most effective leaders, especially during times of crisis, they were motivated and they led with purpose. And purpose is about vision, and vision is about why, not what, not how, not how much, how many. It's about why. So it begins with a compelling purpose, which is about why, which touches the hearts and the minds. Why do we exist? Why is this important, what we're doing right now? That's first. The second E is express. Express is really where you take it out, you open the door, and you take that well-crafted vision to the world in the organization. That means bringing it to the team. And there are lots of ways to do that. Traditionally, in the, let's say, old days, it might be a town hall. It might be out on the floor in front of the team. It might be by the water cooler. And then certainly, we got into vlogs and blogs and so on and so on. It's about omni-channel. It's about leveraging different touch points to express your vision so that it really touches the hearts and minds of people. That leads to the third E, which is excite. And excite is really the moment of truth. It's when people start to lean in and say, wow, I want to be part of this. How can I be part of this? Or they even raise their hand to say, hey, I've got an idea. So this is when people are leaning in and they're excited. That's for every leader a moment of truth. And the turning point comes at the fourth E, when the leader then shifts to leader as enabler, to enable. And there's lots of other words that are used like empower and so on. But I would say enable is really about creating the environment or the arena where every member of the team can shine, where they can be the best version of themselves. There's a great phrase from a guy named Dan Cable at London Business School, where he talks about freedom in the frame, where leaders create a frame for their team members to move within. And the size of that frame depends on the person. Depends on their track record, their ability to make a promise and keep it and deliver. But you give each person on your team a frame and you let them move within the frame. In other words, leader as enabler is not only creating the environment, giving them the tools, it sometimes also means stepping out of the way, just getting out of the way. Let them go. Let them experiment. Let them fall. Let them get back up. And of course, the fifth E. Since the beginning of time, and I can tell you with confidence until the end of time, this will be the ultimate measurement of the effective leader, is to execute. Taking that vision and bringing it to life for measurable impact. That's execute. And ultimately, in my role as a CEO, I'm measured on that output, right? It's the other stuff, the other 4 E's are very important, but it has to result in something that's measurable and visible and tangible. And that's execute. So those are the 5 E's. I think it's timeless, again, borderless. It's especially important right now. Each of those E's are challenging right now in this new world. I would tell you, for me, the big challenge I encountered was the second E. How do you express your vision in a way that's really going to touch the hearts and the minds when you're sitting in front of a laptop all day? That's a big challenge for a lot of leaders. For some leaders, how do you enable when you're sitting in front of a laptop all day? How do you really make sure that people have the tools they need and so on? So yeah, it's, I always come back to those 5 E's. And this model, by the way, is familiar and it's fresh, but it's also, it's a unique take. It's built on the back of many, many leaders that I've studied or I've followed in the past, all the way back to, you can go back to the beginning of time, but if we talk about even 100 plus years ago, Matsushita, who founded Panasonic, he talked about empathy and execution. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi, who was the ultimate example of engagement, the emotional connection with people, that he was so engaged with people and so in touch. Jack Welch, he had his version of 3 E's. Bob McDonald, the CEO of P&G, had his 5 E's. There's so many models out there, and I've taken and kind of put my own viewpoint on this using my journey.
Wonderful. That's a short masterclass of E5 that you could give to us. And it makes a lot of sense that every E is connected to each other. And it just doesn't start with a bold vision, but it also ends with a great execution. So last on the leadership traits, the skills and the frameworks is one interesting piece that I came across, which kind of connected leadership and wheels of the clock. Could you shed some light on that particular piece, Paul?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking about that. Clearly you read my book. Okay, thank you. It's interesting. If you, most of us, when we check our watch, what do we look at? We look at the time, and that's it. Which is really interesting. There's some metaphors here, but there's a lot of stuff going on inside that watch. But all we see is the output. We just see the time. So I see that as a few things. One, we know that somewhere inside that watch, something magical is happening. Well, it's not magical. It's actually quite scientific. It's about wheels moving, and they're all interconnected. When you look at the mechanics of a watch, it's remarkable. And I encourage you to, check it out. Get onto YouTube and look at the mechanics of a watch. It's amazing. It's no wonder that watchmakers get so fascinated with each and every moving part. And watchmakers will be the first ones to tell you that every single part needs to be in sync. Every single piece. There is not one piece more important than the other inside a watch. Isn't that fascinating? Every little dial, wheel, needle is important. And it's the same thing with leadership. I make the connection with leadership that it's a series of muscles. You could call them wheels if you like. And the E5 is certainly that. There's 5 independent/interdependent wheels. One cannot work alone. They all need to work together in some way. And it's the same thing with the watch. So, go back to what I said earlier. Sometimes we look at the output and we forget what happens behind that output. And if you talk in the business environment, it's like saying, what time is it, looking at the watch? Well, in the business environment, we look at the P&L at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. But actually, there's always stories behind the numbers. There are moving parts, just like inside the watch. And there are people, of course, involved. So I'll tell you one thing, Shrikant, that I've started several years ago is I decided that we shouldn't start conversations with the output. We should start with people that generate the output. So if you were to join any of my business meetings and reviews and so on that I have, regardless of the team I'm speaking to, we never start a meeting with numbers. And that took my teams a long time to get used to. Can you imagine talking with the CFO and the finance team saying, guys, all right, here we go. Let's do this review and so on, quarterly and so on. Okay, but you can't start with numbers. I want to talk about the moving parts, like inside the watch, that got us to the numbers. We'll get to the numbers at the end. That's the output. That's the outcome. Let's talk about all the stuff that happened to get us there.
The journey is more important than the destination in some ways.
Well, the destination will always be important in the business environment. Hey, I'm measured by that. I will always have to present results that are better than satisfactory, right? We always want to over deliver on the promise, but I think they're probably equally important. But I want to know the story behind the numbers. I want to know who the people are that are really moving the wheels, what tools they have, and what tools they might need. What support is required for them to accelerate on moving those wheels? And how can we help them shine? That's all about, in my mind, that's what leadership is really essentially. Game-changing leadership is not about simply measuring the output. Anybody can do that. It's about how do you enable people to be the best version of themselves. Peter Drucker has a great quote, by the way. And actually, a wonderful thing about leadership, Isaac Newton said, right? Isaac Newton said, stand on the shoulders of giants and we can see further, right? So Peter Drucker is known as the guru of leadership, but we also know that he had people that taught him. He cites professors that he learned from and other leaders. And then he has some apprentices. And one of his most famous apprentices is Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall Goldsmith, wrote what got you here won't get you there, triggers, mojo, and so on and so on. So he taught Marshall Goldsmith some very important things. Marshall Goldsmith is my coach. So Marshall and I talk regularly, and Marshall taught me something that Peter Drucker taught him. So this is the beauty of leadership. It's open source code, and we have a responsibility to pass it on.
Very true.
Here's what Marshall taught me, a phrase that Peter Drucker said. He said, leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about making a positive impact on the world. That sums it up, huh, Shrikant?
Absolutely.
That sums it up right there.
Excellent. So, Paul, we have had some great conversations so far, starting from your early childhood to how you got into leadership, your experiences working in multiple geographies, and some of the leadership traits and mantras that you have been able to share with us. So, are you ready for the power of 3 round?
Sure, bring it on.
3 most difficult leadership moments that Paul had.
Very first time as a leader. In fact, I was the student council president in my high school. I got elected based on a bunch of promises that I couldn't keep. I said I was going to create a radio station in my high school. I got on stage and said all kinds of crazy things. I just wanted to be student council president. And then I realized that, wow, once you're elected, that's when it gets tough. So that's one. Second one was when I arrived in Japan. When I went to Singapore and I was faced with developing a brand which had no recognition whatsoever out of Japan in Singapore in the APAC region. So I was coming from a market where everybody knew our brand. I arrived in Singapore and nobody knew our brand. By the way, nobody knew me. Brand new place. A man arrives with a suitcase, suddenly faced with building something from scratch, and then building a team, getting people to come and join me on that team. But fortunately, we were able to do it. And then, of course, India. Arriving in India in 2017, just days after demonetization was announced, seeing the long lines around the blocks at the banks, and being tasked with taking a ship which was shaking, almost on the verge of sinking, and being tasked with getting it on track. Not only that, not only stabilizing, but accelerating and building a team which was future ready. All 3 of those were big, big challenges. And all 3 of them had similar things. I was outside of my comfort zone. I was in a completely new world.
Excellent. So in the current world order that we are in today, 3 traits the leaders shouldn't have.
That shouldn't have. 1, I follow the mantra of 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means listen more than you speak. So you shouldn't speak more than you listen, especially now, by the way, especially now. 2, use I more than we. Leaders shouldn't use I more than we. We're in a world now where it's about us. It's about the team. It's about people moving forward together. And we know that 1 + 1 is 3, right? As a leader. So it's less about I. Yeah. And the final one is leader should not and should remove this phrase from his or her language. I know. The leader should be saying, I want to know.
Beautiful. So continuing on that, 3 qualities you look for when you hire people to join your team.
I asked this question, by the way. I even put it in job descriptions. I'm looking for people who've made a lot of mistakes in their past. I want to hire people to join my team who have made lots of mistakes. And the reason for that is we know that when you make mistakes, as I said earlier, we should gain some wisdom. And of course, based on those mistakes. I want to learn about how that person has grown and become more resilient and so on. So that becomes a focal point of our conversation. It's not the classic question, tell me about your failures. Tell me about mistakes that you made in the past. Think, if you were to go back and do it again, what would you do differently? I want to talk about those examples because that's wisdom. Those are tools in the box. So that's absolutely one thing I look for. People who've made mistakes. And by the way, when I'm interviewing people, they really like this because it's fun to talk. And then I share some of the mistakes I made. Oh, yeah, it reminds me that one time I, made this mistake. So that's great. The next one is I'm looking for people, especially when I'm hiring leaders. And this is something I encourage everyone who's a leader who's listening to think about asking in your process when you're hiring people. Is often in an interview process, people will tell about their own achievements. What I want to know is the people that leader has mentored during his or her journey. And what have they gone on to do? So tell me about the people that you've mentored, that you've coached, that you've raised up, and tell me about the good stuff they've gone on to do. Where are they now? And of course, are you still in touch with them? That tells me about relationships, the importance of keeping relationships and building relationships and raising others. Yeah. Third one, and ultimately this is really important to me. I'm a strong believer in this notion of doing well and doing good. I think we all should be the best we can be in our role, whatever your role is. Let's call it 9 to 5, although nobody works 9 to 5 anymore, but in our professional lives, be the best you can be at that. But that's doing well. But the do good element is about doing something good for the world in some way. So I want to understand what the person is doing in his or her life, aside from doing well in their professional life. Outside of that, what are they doing? What actions are they taking to make the world a better place?
Awesome. 3 books on leadership that you would recommend for leaders to carry with them. And you have the opportunity to talk about your book as well.
well, I do believe in the E5 as a concept, and so I'm using it with my leaders in the reading. But let's face it, my Bible. If I had to choose a Bible, let's say the question is you're stranded, you're on a stranded island. You can only bring one leadership book with you. What is it? It's this one right here, Good to Great by Jim Collins. This is my Bible. It's been my Bible for 15 years maybe now. It's an incredible book. I almost feel like I have it memorized. I mean, there's so many amazing concepts in here. And what I like about Good to Great is that it's not theoretical. It's actually completely based on data, on science, on actual case studies. Very thorough. And there's concepts in there that are easy to digest and so on. So that's one, Good to Great. Absolutely love it. And he has a great model of leadership, by the way, called Level 5 Leadership. 5 comes into there again somehow. Huh? Another one, which I think is really interesting, is a book about Starbucks. This is by Howard Schultz. It's called Pour Your Heart Into It. And that book is a wonderful story of how Starbucks came from being 2 shops in Seattle to becoming this mega powerhouse. It celebrates Howard Schultz's personal journey maybe a bit more than it could, I think, as a book, if I'm going to be a critic of the book. But inside the book, you start to discover some really important lessons on leadership. And I really like that story because, by the way, we learn a lot from the stories of others, their journeys. And his journey and the journey of Starbucks is fascinating. Red ocean, highly competitive, low margins, and how they created a blue ocean in a very competitive space. And so I really like that. And he showed leadership along the way. And he also showed some humility in some of the mistakes he made as well. Those are 2. If I have to think of a third, there are a lot of great books about sports. And I actually read Sachin Tendulkar's biography. It's on my shelf here in Tokyo. I'm sorry, I can't remember the title, though. You would probably know it. Maybe it's just called Sachin. But there are several out there. I would say instead of naming one book, I would say biography of someone who performed at a high level over a long period of time. There's always going to be some lessons in there about leadership. Because somebody like Sachin Tendulkar, for example, or any superstar, we always think, oh, he was a superstar and he was great. So actually, if you break it down, he had ups and downs. He had slumps where he was bashed and criticized. He's finished. He's washed up. And then he had highs where he was the king of the world. But those superstars, they did something remarkable. They never let themselves get too high. They never let themselves get too low. And they showed leadership in the process. And if you talk to those around Sachin and others who played with him, the young cricketers, they'll tell you that they learn so much from his behavior through the highs and the lows. That's leadership.
So that brings us to the last segment of our conversation. We have had quite a lot of conversations around leadership, around what needs to be done by leaders. But this section is focused more on you, more about Paul.
Sure.
If Paul were to have a conversation, have a podcast with the younger version of Paul, what would Paul be telling the younger version of Paul today?
Buckle up. Buckle up your seatbelt, young man. Here we go. I think that could be a great podcast. Buckle up.
Wow.
It means get ready for a wild ride, right? I would certainly tell that young guy that, well, you think about the spirit I had when I was 22 years old. I got on the plane, very first time in my life, by the way. I had a fresh passport, literally fresh, just received. Never been on an airplane in my life. Never been out of Canada, other than I've been to, Detroit, across the border, but I've never really been anywhere outside of my little circle, my little world. And I was on my way to travel across the world to probably as far away a place you could go in terms of, way of life and language, everything, Japan. I was arriving in Osaka, Japan in 1990. I didn't speak a word of Japanese. I had my life savings of $300 Canadian. It's about 17,000 rupees. Everything I own in my world, I was carrying in my backpack, nowhere to stay, no job. And there I was arriving in Japan. And that spirit I had back then, I would sum it up as when in doubt, just go. Maybe that's the name of the podcast. When in doubt, just go.
No, I like buckle up.
Okay, buckle up it is. The subline is when in doubt, just go. Maybe that's the first episode. Yeah.
Cool. Great. And you have been also doing something interesting, which is coaching the Indian ice hockey team up there in the Himalayas. What I want to know about is not about why you are coaching them. What I want to know about is the lessons learned through the lens of the coach of the Indian ice hockey team.
Yeah, well, thank you. Many people listening might not know that India has two national ice hockey teams, a men's and a women's team, believe it or not. And, I didn't know that there was ice hockey in India, but I discovered it thanks to a friend from the Canadian Embassy in Mumbai. And so anyway, I was able to get up there and volunteer and coach. Well, first of all, I discovered how sport can really build community and bring people together. Talk about a universal concept, whether you're on the cricket pitch, whether you're on the ice rink up at 13,000 feet in the Himalayas, or, on the rugby pitch or soccer field, whatever it is, sport brings people together. Look what happened recently with the US Open and these two young women. I mean, what an incredible story, right? Sport brings people together, builds community. I think it also builds life skills, which are used off the field, off the ice, and so on. Friendships that last forever. And of course, hope for the future. So my journeys up to the top of the world, to the Himalayas, to Ladakh, which I think is one of the most beautiful places on this earth, has really inspired me. That the fact that I'm able to use hockey, my passion, to bring people together, to help create life skills, to also do good, to raise awareness of climate change, and so on. I think it's just a remarkable thing. I absolutely have fallen in love with Ladakh, and I hope I can get back every year once it's safe.
And specific coaching lessons from there?
Well, one of the things is that it's the same thing as leading, let's say in a business environment, coaching. When the people you're coaching or leading are genuinely interested and passionate, and they're keen to learn and improve, it's a joy. So when I go to Ladakh and I coach, it's 100%. Talk about engagement. Those kids up on the ice from Ladakh at 13,000 feet are fully engaged. And it's a very easy audience when you're coaching. You don't need to tell them to try harder because they try hard. The motivation and the passion is there. So that's one lesson I learned. It's a lot of fun to be around people that are genuinely keen to improve, to get better. And I think the other element is fun. There needs to be a fun factor in everything we do. Now, take it back from the 13,000 feet down to sea level in our world day to day. I'm sure in your world too, Srikanth, fun's probably not a word that's used often in your meetings when you're doing reviews and so on. But I think there needs to be an element of fun in everything we do. And let's face it, it's fun to achieve goals. We need to push pause and celebrate the milestones. I do that as a coach all the time. When that little boy or that little girl first puts on their skates and they stand on their skates and they fall down and they get back up. They take a couple strides and they fall down again and they get back up and they go. And then 30 minutes later, they're actually gliding along on that lake with the mountains in the background and the look of joy on their face. That's a milestone that needs to be celebrated. That's fun.
Wonderful. Paul, you did mention about you're at halftime in your career, right?
Yeah.
So what next for Paul?
It's a question that I never really asked myself until I crossed 50. Now that I'm 53, it's one of the, maybe there's something about hitting 50, you start to think about mortality and all these things. I know I got a lot of good years ahead of me, but I've started to think about that. I've always been a guy who's very mission focused, right? So my mission right now is this, and I'm going to be the best I can be in my current mission. But if I think about the longer term, I will continue to be in roles where I can lead and help people be the best version of themselves. That's why I wake up every day. And I happen to be working in an organization in Randstad that supports me fully and matches with my own personal values. So that's great. I'm very happy in the company and I'm able to, focus on my mission to help people shine. And I'll continue to do that. I think at one point, let's say when it's time to move on from the corporate world, that'll come one day. I would really like to continue writing. I would like to continue working with organizations that are on a mission to go from good to great, with leaders who are also on a mission to not only be competent managers and competent leaders, but to be game changers. I'd be very keen to work with those leaders and so on. So, and to share some of my own experiences along the way. So yeah, I think that's sort of what's next for me in the future, but that's still a way away. I'm on a mission now here in Japan. We're growing fast. At the same time, I'm in close touch with our colleagues in India and watching and cheering for them loudly as they continue to accelerate and do great things at Randstad in India.
How wonderful. Wishing you all the very best in your life journeys, Paul. So on that note, as we come to a wrap on Inspire Someone Today, this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. So what would Paul's Inspire Someone Today message to all the listeners out there?
Well, first of all, I would say a couple things. One is we all need to understand what our purpose is in order to really have a full life. And your purpose needs to be connected with a why. Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I do what I do? And I'll come back to what I said earlier about doing well and doing good. I think we all focus on being the best we can be in the role that we play, whether we're a leader or a follower or a husband, a wife, a father or son, student, whatever the role is you play, be the best you can be at that. That's important. Just as important, find your definition of doing good and take action, even one small action towards making the world a better place. That to me is all about full life. And by the way, it feels good. If you've ever done any volunteer work and so on, you know how good that feels. So if you want to feel inspired, go and help out somebody who needs help. Instant inspiration. So I would leave everyone with that. Do well, do good. And finally, as I said earlier, and I'll kind of give you one more of my mantras, or we'll call it a hashtag. The wonderful thing about human beings is we have the ability to be better than yesterday every day if we make the choice to do so. So if we all focus on that 1 degree of change every day, just be a bit better than yesterday. Imagine what happens over 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. The potential is endless. So better than yesterday.
Better than yesterday. That's the message, folks, from Paul. Paul, I started the sessions saying that I'm short of adjectives to describe who you are. One more piece that I can definitely add to that is a wonderful storyteller. It's been a great honor talking to you, and thanks so much for taking time and joining us and sharing those bits of wisdom and nuggets with me and with all of our listeners. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Srikanth. I really enjoyed it, and I really like what you're doing. Keep up the great work.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what you listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates.
This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.